Okay, so it's become very clear now that Boruto Tbv Vortex and pretty much the whole entire manga industry as a whole has been essentially rigged for quite some time now. Because essentially it's been no secret that the manga industry for the last several years has essentially been looking a certain way as far as, well, the levels of success that we have seen. Opposed to previous times, the last few years has showcased manga sales not looking the greatest. We went from the days of volume selling a million first week for One Piece and all sorts of stuff to where a lot of series just aren't seeing a level of success that we are used to. And that has sparked debate over last several years as far as where the manga industry is headed and how much the anime industry has impacted the manga industry with its level of success that it has obtained in recent times. But what I came across recently had me looking at it like, oh, manga is actually doing very well. Essentially, there's some stuff that we haven't been able to see up until now as far as the level of success that manga actually has and how many people are really into this thing. Let's talk about it. And of course, before we continue, hit that subscribe button and that bell so you can get notified on all my videos. Yes, people, it's been for a while now that it's been the talk of the town, so to speak, that the manga industry as a whole, and I use Boruto in particular because Boruto in recent times has gotten essentially a lot of criticism as far as the levels of success when it comes to the sales. Despite the fact that Boruto is very much so one of the most read mangas, you check almost any of the apps out there and Boruto is usually at the very least top 5, top 10 most read mangas. A lot of the times it's in the top 3, sometimes it's even the most read manga. So there's never been a question on whether or not there's interest in the Boruto story, but as far as the sales go, people have been using that essentially against Boruto and again even the entire industry as a whole as a measure of, well, levels of interest in this story and in this medium. Because again, it's no secret that manga over recent times hasn't been doing the same type of numbers that it did even, let's just say, half a decade ago or a decade ago. In particular, during, for example, COVID times, manga sales were at an all-time high, and obviously a lot of that is attributed to, of course, people being at home more and all of that stuff. But even prior to that, manga sales were a lot higher than what we've seen in recent times. Like, for example, to get into the top 10 most sold in the first week of manga, you had to have at the very least like 100,000 sales or somewhere in that ballpark to be able to be, you know, a high seller. Opposed to nowadays where honestly a manga could have sometimes even 30,000, 20,000, 15,000, 10,000 and still make it into that bracket, which had a lot of people for a long time now looking at it like, well, maybe manga just isn't it anymore. Because even myself, I've been looking at it as, okay, what's been happening here? Considering the fact that anime as a medium has gone global, it is one of the most popular things of all time. We're seeing records being shattered with films hitting theaters, but opposed to what you assume across the board where, of course, if anime is, you know, going up, manga sales should have gone up as well. That hasn't really been the case, at the very least from what we've seen. Again, manga sales just weren't really looking that great. But then that begs the question something of, okay, is it that manga has gone down as far as people just aren't interested in manga anymore, people aren't buying manga anymore, people aren't supporting manga, or, well, maybe the numbers have been a little bit suppressed as well, again, up until this moment. Because with the latest volume of the Boruto Tbv Vortex manga, it came across my attention that we actually got to get a good view of what the digital sales were like, a component of this whole puzzle that has been pretty much suppressed and been out of the public view for quite some time. So every time we ever got one of those Shoseki rankings and the sales numbers and whatnot, we've only been privy to the numbers of, you know, essentially the physical purchases, people actually picking up the books. We don't ever see, and they don't actually account into a lot of those rankings, what the digital side of things, essentially numbers that we don't get to see actually contribute to the entirety of whether it be first week sales or as a whole, what the sales figures for each volume and each manga are looking like. But what I have right here just paints an entire different picture of the narrative that has been essentially put forth against Boruto and the manga industry as a whole as far as what the success is really like. Because you would never expect how much digital sales have actually gone up in recent times. Obviously, with the rise of digital content and everything kind of going more so towards the digital approach, yeah, manga readers, manga purchasers, manga supporters have been going the more so digital route. Because the latest releases of manga volumes have come out, and of course in the top 5 you got series like Kingdom, Goku Rakugai, Blue Box, Chainsaw Man, and of course the latest volume of Boruto. And if you look at it strictly of what they essentially tell you of like, hey yo, Boruto just did this number, essentially it accumulated approximately 50,000 more or less physical copies. But we actually have the digital numbers as well, because according to this, there's an estimated between 42,000 and 64,000 digital downloads of the volume as well. Essentially 40 to 60,000 extra numbers, extra copies, extra purchases that were not showcased and not included in the sales figure when things come out for, you know, the rankings and whatnot. So essentially the latest Boruto volume did roughly around 90 to 100 and something thousand copies in 5 days of its release. But again, at face value, most people are going to see, because they only usually have, up until this point anyway, shown physical sales like, oh, okay, in 5 days Boruto did, you know, about 50k, like, you know, it's cool. But once you get privy to these numbers that essentially have been suppressed up until this point, it paints an entire different picture. And I got to imagine that if it's showcasing this for this of, again, 42 to 64,000, that's essentially possibly anywhere from the same amount or even more people buying the digital version, that yeah, manga is actually thriving very much so. And the powers that be, the higher up, so to speak, got to start showcasing the entire picture as far as the levels of success that these things are truly obtaining. Because if you're only showing half of the puzzle, so to speak, then essentially you're only showcasing a fraction of what the success is. It'd be the equivalent to anything, like whether you go to like video games, for example. Imagine like the latest Dragon Ball game came out and it did 500,000 physical and 700,000 digital, but they only show you like, yeah, 500,000 physical. You would be like, oh, okay, so it did like 500,000. When you see that extra 600,000-700,000, you'd be like, oh, which makes me also look at it like, why aren't they starting to include, considering digital has gotten to this point that it is rivaling the numbers of physical copies, why aren't they including these numbers? Honestly, it would make people look at the industry in an entire different manner. It would make people look at it like, okay, manga actually isn't going down, it's actually going just a different route as far as the way things are done and the way the success is accumulated. But I mean, at the end of the day, again, the numbers is proof right there that yeah, not only are people reading Boruto on the free apps and all that stuff, they are buying it, they're buying the physical, and even more so now, an entire new audience of digital supporters essentially are picking up the copies as well, and this needs to be added into it. Honestly, I hope that moving forward, Shoseki in particular, because that's the ranking that people usually look at. The equivalent would be like Billboard, so to speak. You know, Billboard is mainly what people look at for the numbers of like albums of music or whatnot. Like imagine Billboard didn't count digital as well. Like we'd be in some really troubled waters for music, although that's a whole other different topic with streaming and all that stuff. Although kind of the same if you look at it, considering like, you know, people could stream music for free on certain apps, people could stream manga on certain apps. So yeah, it's kind of the same, but essentially manga has been kind of more so condensed or suppressed the levels of success up until this point, when you start to notice that there's essentially a whole other avenue of sales that have been coming in, a whole other avenue of support. And I think that these rankings need to start reflecting that, because now it's starting to make me look at the industry as a whole, not only Boruto. Like for example, a lot of people have been looking at like a One Piece or any of the other major juggernauts out there, like, well, One Piece used to do 1 million first week, now it's not even doing 1 million in a month. No, probably One Piece is doing maybe even double that. It's just that people have gone the digital route, which is something that also, I guess, on a side note, it's not surprising considering the fact that not only of course people have been transitioning from, you know, physical copies to digital, but even more so, just think about it as far as like, you know, what you actually purchase and what you physically have in your home. For the hardcore manga fans, for the hardcore collectors, they can only have so many books in their, you know, living quarters, so to speak. So a lot of people probably have come to a point, collectors especially, where it's like, yo dog, to have all of One Piece alone is a very tall order and a very massive collection. But if you're a manga fan that buys all sorts of different series, how are you going to be able to fit all those books in your house? At a certain point, of course, you're going to have to figure out a different method. So that probably had also a lot of collectors looking at it like, yo, I love my physicals and I'll of course purchase the ones that matter to me. And honestly, based on the numbers, it seems as though manga is doing great. Anywhere from, again, Boruto doing about 100k in 5 days. Higher ups, pay attention, stop suppressing certain aspects of information as far as the success levels that a lot of these things actually have, in terms of the numbers are a lot higher than what they're showcasing, because it makes the manga industry as a whole kind of look a little bit weaker than it actually is, especially considering the fact that, again, the medium as a whole is just at a whole different level than it's ever been. It should not only reflect the anime side of things, but the manga as well. Curious what you guys think about this whole thing though. What is the reason in your mind why they would suppress the numbers as far as on the digital side of things go, when in all honesty, that's one of the best marketing tools possible to showcase that a series is successful, because oftentimes people see something is successful and they want to go out and support it. But that's all I have for this one. I'm Tim. As always, people, have an awesome day. Peace in.